So we begin officially. Good day and welcome to the Public Accounts Committee's hearing. Today we will be looking at an examination of the report of the Auditor General on the financial statements of the Land Settlement Agency, the LSA, for the financial years 2010 to 2013 and follow up on the implementation of the recommendations made in the 11th Public Accounts Committee report on the examination of the audited financial statements of the LSA for the financial years 2008 and 2009. I wish to formally welcome officials from the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, Ministry of Agriculture and Lands and Fisheries, the Land Settlement Agencies, the Auditor General's Department, and the viewing members of the public, and to wish you all a very good morning. My name is Devendranath Tanku. I am the Chairman of the Public Accounts Committee. Today, I want to provide some brief information to you what the Public Accounts Committee is supposed to be doing. So the Public Accounts Committee has a mandate to consider and report to the House on A, appropriation accounts of monies expended out of sums granted by the Parliament to meet the public expenditure of Trinidad and Tobago, and B, such other accounts as may be referred to the committee by the House of Representatives or as are authorized or required to be considered by the committee under any other enactment, and C, the report of the Auditor General on any such accounts. The purpose of this meeting is for the Public Accounts Committee to conduct an examination of the reports of the Auditor General on the financial statements of the LSA for the financial years 2010 to 13, and to follow up on the implementation of the recommendations made in the 11th PAC report on an examination of the audited financial statements of the LSA for the financial years 2008 and 2009. Specifically, to assess whether the LSA's expenditure conforms to the authority which governs it, to assist the LSA in achieving the efficient execution of its mandate while ensuring that expenditure is embarked upon in accordance with parliamentary approval, and to determine the challenges being faced by the LSA and the possible solutions to these challenges. Based on the issues identified, the following representatives were invited to today's public hearing. As I indicated, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries, the LSA, and the Auditor General's Department. I've been asked to advise that this meeting is being broadcast live on the Parliament's Channel 11, on Radio 105.5 FM, and the Parliament's YouTube channel, ParlView. Viewers and listeners are welcomed to send their comments related to today's inquiry to email address parl101@ttparliament.org or via facebook.com/ttparliament or X, formerly Twitter, @ttparliament. I would now like to ask members of the committee to introduce themselves to you and to members of the viewing audience, beginning on my right.
Jillian John, member.
Good morning and Happy New Year. Paula Gopi, school member.
Good morning, Happy New Year. Welcome, Roger Monroe, member.
Ma'am?
Hazel Thompson, member. I've already told you good morning outside and wishing you Happy New Year.
Good morning again and Happy New Year. Dr. Emery Brown, member of the committee. Welcome.
Thank you. And now we'll extend the courtesies to your good selves to do the same. Beginning with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, please introduce yourselves and your colleagues who will be joining you. Ministry of Housing and Urban Development first.
Good morning all. Andre Francis Charles, Acting Executive Secretary.
That's it, that's everyone. Okay, thank you very much. Can the representatives from the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries now introduce yourselves and your colleagues?
Good morning all. Hazel. Good morning all. Miller Bogdani, Acting Government Ministry.
Good morning everyone, I'm Paula Drake, Commissioner of State Land.
And from the Land Settlements Agency,
Good morning, all. My name is Alan Miguel. I'm the chairman of the Land Settlement Committee.
Good morning all. Hazar Hussain, Chief Executive Officer of the LSA.
Good morning to everyone. Tracy Davidson Celestine, Manager Corporate Services.
Good morning, everyone. Shalag Roseman, Manager of the Tenure Regularization Unit.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sachidanan Basal. I'm Manager of the Infrastructure Development Unit.
Good morning, everyone. Sydney Macmillan, Manager, Containment Unit, LSA.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Siobhan Reese, HR Specialist, Land Settlement Agency.
Good morning, all. My name is Oma Munu Singh, Senior Accountant of the LSA.
thank you very, very much. As we proceed, I want to invite the Auditor General to make a brief opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman. Okay, good morning, Chairman, committee members, agency and ministry officials, and members of the viewing public. Our responsibility as it relates to the agency is outlined in Section 33 of the State Land Regularization of Tenure Act, which states the accounts of the Land Settlement Agency shall be subject to audit by the Auditor General in all respects, as if the accounts of the agency were the public accounts of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you.
May I now invite the Deputy Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development to make a brief opening statement, please.
Good morning, all. Mr. Chairman, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development and the Land Settlement Agency welcome the opportunity to be here to engage with the PAC and to answer all questions and concerns with candor. We do appreciate that some instances we would have to submit our responses in writing, but we appreciate the opportunity to be accountable for government funding. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. May I now invite a representative from the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries to make a brief opening statement, please.
Thank you, Chair. The Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries plays a central role in the sustainable management of Trinidad's land resources. To the Land Management Division, the Ministry is committed to ensuring that state lands are utilized efficiently, focusing on agricultural development, food security, and responsible land use. The L&D objectives include facilitating secure tenure for all farmers, managing state lands, and addressing the challenges posed by illegal squatting. To support this goal, the Ministry has been strengthening its capacity by improving data collection and analysis, including an ongoing upgrade of our information system at the LEA. These upgrades will enable better management of state lands and support the Ministry's broader mandate to promote sustainable agriculture while ensuring compliance with land use policies. In this context, the mass collaboration with the Land Settlement Agency is critical in addressing illegal squatting. The MAL therefore remains committed to working with the relevant agencies as it supports regularization efforts in squatting on state lands. As part of our commitment to transparency and accountability, the MAL supports the Public Accounts Committee in its mandate to ensure that government expenditure complies with established rules and regulations, and is pleased to be here today to elaborate further and provide clarification on matters relevant to today's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we begin today's inquiry. The procedure usually is that the chairman would begin the inquiry with questions from myself, and then we open the floor to other members of the committee to also engage clarifications and explanations. Oh, my apologies. Apparently, I've not invited the most pressing individual and the most pressing group today. So, if I may I invite the representative from the Land Settlement Agency, the chairman is here, Mr. Miguel, to give us some brief opening remarks. My apologies for leaving you out, but I was actually hoping to save the best for last. Yeah, save myself.
The Land Settlement Agency was established as a body corporate and under section 5.1 of the State Land Regularization of Tenure Act, chapter 57.
Put your mic on.
Oh, my apologies. Right, so the Land Settlement Agency was established as a body corporate under section 5.1 of the State Land Regularization of Tenure Act, chapter 5705. The primary goal is to ensure that citizens residing on safe land without legal documentation are provided with security of tenure. This is accomplished through a process of regularization, which include granting certificates of comfort, statutory leases, and eventually deeds of lease to qualified individuals. By doing so, the Land Settlement Agency helps promote social equity in an orderly manner. The Land Settlement Agency helps promote social equity and the development in communities where informal housing is prevalent. The Land Settlement Agency has submitted audited financial accounts to the Committee for the financial year 2013 to 2014. This was followed up by written submission and appendices. Today, Mr. Chairman, we are present here before the committee to assist in this regard.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So as I indicated before, the normal sequence is I would initiate the questioning and then turn it over to other members of the committee for further questions. If we may begin, one of the first items I have on my agenda are outstanding financial statements. A submission from the Auditor General's Department dated July 23, 2024 indicated that LSA's financial statements for financial year 2014 to 2019 were submitted to audit. LSA then indicated that the financial statement for 2020 fiscal was submitted for audit on February 17, 2022. According to the written submissions from your good selves, dated the 19th of November 2024 from the Auditor General's Department, the audit of the LSA's accounts and financial statements for the financial years 2014 and 2015 commenced in October 2022. However, the Auditor General's Department advised that in finalizing LSA's 2013 audit in January 2024, I want to read that again just for the public information. In finalizing the LSA's 2013 audit in January 2024, material amendments were made to those financial statements. This resulted in required amendments to the 2014 to 2019 financial statements previously submitted to the Auditor General's Department. My question is whether those amendments have in fact been submitted. December 11th. So just for the references again, we are talking about financial statements that date back several years, and we are still in the process of finalizing and revising those that have already been submitted, correct?
Yeah, we did field work for 2014, and we can proceed with certifying that now.
In the LSA, in their communication with us, all right, so I ask this question. So the LSA in their communication to us advised that the financial statements for fiscal 2021 would have been submitted by November 20th, 2024. So fiscal 2021 to be submitted by November 30th, 2024, and the financial statements for financial year 2022 and 23 would have been submitted by December 10th, 2024. So based on LSA's commentary, by December 10th, 2024, we would have had at the Auditor General's Department submitted from LSA all the financial statements up to and including fiscal 2023. Can you confirm whether that has in fact been submitted?
Well, I was reliably informed that we got the statements for 22 and 23 yesterday.
What about the one for 21?
Yeah.
The one for 21?
Yeah. Up to and including 2023.
Right, so that takes care of outstanding financial statements. So my understanding is that you are fairly well up to date with your submissions to the Auditor General's Department. We are now waiting the Auditor General's Department to submit to the Parliament. But the normal sequence, you submit to the Minister, Minister to Parliament, Parliament back to us. It is a concern that was raised in our sessions earlier about the length of time it takes before the submissions from, for example, in this instance, where LSA would have submitted to the Auditor General's Department, and then we are looking at several years that would have passed before it is submitted to Parliament itself. So my first question, even though LSA is before us, my first question is to the Auditor General's Department again. Why is it then taking so long to get these financial statements from, we received some from LSA to you, but why is it taking so long to get from your hands to the Parliament's hands?
I suppose the perennial problem of staffing that always comes up. We prioritize audits based on the staff we have. So obviously some audits would fall behind. And until we get staffing under control or solve that staffing problem, then we would continue to be in that situation.
Just out of curiosity, you said staffing is the issue. I know we're here to deal with this particular issue, but since your staffing affects not just this interrogation, but other interrogations as well, what is the extent of your understaffing?
I really can't give any figures right now in terms of the percentage. I haven't looked at it for a while because we have the staff that we have and we need to do the audit, so we're concentrating on that. But in terms of the actual staff shortage, we'll have to get back to you on that. In terms of the percentage and so on.
So I look forward for you to provide that to the committee in due course. All right, I want to move on to the legislative framework submitted by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development. In your submission on page 5, you advise that one of the weaknesses identified by the LSA has been a lack of containment legislation to treat with further squatting. So squatting has been identified as a major issue. And you identified that one of the problems is that you did not have sufficient legislation to treat with squatting. Now, this was ironically highlighted in the 11th report of the Public Accounts Committee on an examination of the financial statements of the Land Settlements Agency for the financial years 2008 and 2009. So in 2008 and 2009, you would have come before the Public Accounts Committee and identified the absence of legislation to treat properly with squatting. Although you identified that that was an issue. I am now advised that legislation is currently before the LRC, Legislative Review Committee. So an item that was raised 2008 to 2009 to this committee, well, not this committee, but the Public Accounts Committee, is currently in 2025 before the LRC. Can you briefly advise what are some of the items that you would have submitted to LRC for consideration? I'm asking specifically for the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development. Because LRC would have reported to you, you would have then reported back to the LRC, the Legislative Review Committee.
May it please the Chair, I will ask that the LSA give more in-depth information on the status at the LRC. Thank you.
Well, there are two things, but maybe the status may be easier to get to, because one of the things I wanted to find out is that you know what the problem was in 2008, 2009, and you would have drafted legislation to treat, you would have drafted proposals and issues to treat with those problems identified then. So let me ask the questions differently. Have there been updated submissions by LSA to Ministry and then by Ministry to the LRC for review and examination? Has there been updated submissions?
No, so far we have no updated submissions.
Excellent. So that brings me back to the other side of the question. When exactly were your submissions submitted to the LRC? What time frame? And I'm asking that in the context that 2008, 2009 you identified the problem, and we are now in 2025 and LRC is still looking at this.
I've been informed that that was submitted in 2017.
So in 2017, you submitted the documentation. I'm sorry to repeat myself because this for me is a major issue. 2017, you submitted your recommendations for amendments to the legislation that you viewed as critical because it was identified as a problem a decade before that. We are now in 2025. Can you advise what actions have been taken to initiate maybe some more aggressive feedback from the LRC in terms of getting the legislation finalized? So that's the status I think you were asking about. What's the current status of the proposed legislation that would treat with squatting, which was identified as a problem for the LSA? What's the current status? Anybody knows?
If I may?
Yes, please.
Okay. First, I want to probably start with outlining the issue where, as of 1998, when the Act was passed and persons were invited to apply for regularization, we had about 23,000 persons who applied, squatters. As of this date, we probably in the vicinity of 60,000 families who are now squatting. With respect to the legislation, in 2014, there was a cabinet decision with respect to, based on recommendations, to change the legislation and to amend certain features of the legislation, both in terms of the State Land Act and the State Land Regularization of Tenure Act. And an ad hoc committee was formed to look at that. And in 2017, the recommendations were made. And as we are reliably informed, it's before the LRC, and as late as 2 months ago, there was a sitting of the LRC to consider this. And that's what we know. In terms of what recommendations were made, several recommendations has been made. One, and very important, a definition of state land to be cleared up. Two, that the CSL, the Commissioner of State Lands, be empowered to delegate authority to the Land Settlement Agency in particular, to act as an agent of the Commissioner to contain squatting. Chairman, as you're aware, the LSA has no power whatsoever to contain squatting as we speak right now. And this was highlighted in the Justice Gobin judgment of 2010, where it was deemed that the LSA would have acted contrary to law up to that point in removing illegal structures. Since then, the LSA has not been able to remove any illegal structures. Another significant change would be the review of the offenses to deal with squatting. Right now, squatting is treated as a criminal act, and the offenses are very minimal. What we have suggested is that squatting be treated as a civil offense, and there be fines for different levels of squatting, for the first time, repeat offenders, etc. And we have suggested fines for that. And of course, the last being, and most significant, being to empower the LSA through the Act with the authority to conduct containment activities. So those are some of the significant things that we have put forward.
In your conversations with the Legislative Review Committee, have they given you a timeline as to when it is that the relevant legislation will be brought for confirmation, when then population of Trinidad and Tobago can reasonably expect legislation to treat with squatting and to treat with this particular aspect as well, the regularization that is required as well? You have any idea from your conversations with the LRC?
Chairman, we know that it's actively being considered.
My friend, it's been actively considered. The issue was raised in 2008. You would have made some submission in 2017. So if I may recommend, even at this stage, maybe a bit more aggression from the LSA to the ministry and from the ministry to the LRC so that we can get this sort of action initiated urgently. Because there's another issue that is identified by LSA as another constraint by LSA, which also requires legislative adjustments, which I think may be part of that same legislative adjustments that you would have been looking at. And that's the fact that LSA is not a landowner. It is in your submissions here, in page 6 of your submission, highlighted as item H, LSA is not a landowner, and as such, delivery on programs such as the gas ship, Petrotrain residential lots program, and the tenancy programs are delayed because of this. In fact, it's not delayed, it's stopped. And until the legislation is adjusted to give you some level of authority to move forward the granting of title, documentation, etc., you will be stuck at one point which you have been stuck at from inception. So the point I'm making is that it's not just the issue with squatter regularization and empowering the LSA to treat with squatter regularization and squatters generally, but it is also that the legislation must now consider whether or not the LSA should become landowner or given some right to transfer the documentation so that persons who are registered, who would have gotten certificates of comfort, can get some documentation that's a little bit more substantial in terms of ownership, etc., so that the whole granting of titles, etc., could be easily facilitated. So that whole spiel was really to bat on your behalf, but also to ask you, what have you done with regards to this specific issue in terms of reason, because you identified two issues so far that we've raised. One was the absence of the authority to treat with squatters and squatters generally in terms of constraining squatters. But the other one is in terms of LSA not being able to treat with squatters who were given certificates of comfort. What have you done with regards to the second issue? We spoke about the first issue. It's before the Legislative Review Committee. But what has been done with regard to the second issue, which is to provide some kind of authority for LSA to treat with land as a landowner, or given some sort of authority to treat with titles, etc. What have you done about it?
So, Chairman, we have made the suggestion in writing with respect to that. One of the legislative changes for the LSA is to become a landowner, which will allow the LSA, as you pointed out, the authority to use the power of self-help to deal with squatters who come onto the lands of if it becomes the lands of the LSA. And secondly, to deal with the other issues, other administrative issues. We have also suggested that the LSA becoming a landowner can then have the authority to speed up its operations. So that has been suggested, and at this very point, we are again reviewing the legislation, and our board has demanded that and has asked that a committee be set up internally for us to review the entire act and to make suggestions once again with respect to the changes that are necessary.
And that would be for LSA to become, in effect, landowner to be able to grant titles, correct?
Exactly, Chairman.
Mr. CEO, let me ask a question to the ministry. Given that you would have raised these issues to the ministry before, to the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, or to the Ministry of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries, either of the two ministries can answer, please, because what I'm really trying to get from this is, given that this issue was raised as a major factor constraining the efficiency and effectiveness of LSA to treat with their clients who are squatters who would have had certificates of comfort, what has the ministries, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development or the Ministry of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries, what have you all done to allow, to get to that point where the LSA would have the authority to distribute certificates of title, which is an issue that they would have raised previously and they're now revising to raise again? Either of the two ministries.
From the ministry's perspective, we are more or less dependent on LSA doing the preliminary work before they submit to the ministry for our reviewing or comments and approval. So the LSA would do the investigation, they would examine the legislation, they would make their recommendations and then send their recommendations to the ministry for our comments and our review. So we are dependent on the LSA finalizing their aspect of the work to submit to us.
Ma'am, I understand that. So that's the relationship. The query I have is, let me make it easier. Has the LSA submitted to the ministry a request for legislative amendments so to facilitate LSA being authorized as a landowner?
To my knowledge, not specific to the landowner, their recommendations have been the 2017 recommendation that would have gone forward.
Sorry.
Right. So can you just repeat it so that the viewing audience can hear?
Their recommendations were, the last set of recommendations, to my knowledge, were the 2017 recommendations. To my knowledge, no information or no recommendation specific to the landowner issue has come to the ministry.
Thank you. Can the Ministry of Agriculture say the same thing?
Good morning again, everyone.
Good morning.
The current legislation as it stands, without the amendments, does allow for the chairman of the board of LSA to sign leases. Now that is specific then to what the legislation calls land settlement areas. So that, and the chairman has signed leases before, I've seen them myself. So it's just for the land settlement areas to be specifically defined. So in the legislation, there are names of places, for example, and I'm just giving you a recent example, what we know as Page. Commissioner of State Lands is in there trying to update agricultural leases because it's zoned as agricultural, yet applicants who would have applied to LSA for residential COC, some have got. So we have two of us doing the same thing in the same space in two different ways. It has happened. And despite the fact that LSA is not the landowner. So recently, like as of 2 months ago, I suggested in writing to LSA that in that specific case, I am prepared as Commissioner of State Lands to have you define this space called Page or Treatham Lodge or whatever they call it. Let us define it properly. There's an old survey plan. Let us say this is the area. And I am prepared to give it to LSA as a land settlement area so that they can go ahead and do what they have to do in there through their board, and that frees up the Commissioner of State Lands. But right now, we are on top of each other doing two different things in the same space, simply because the land settlement areas have not been clearly defined. So my suggestion would be we define these areas, and we can do it very quickly. Let us get survey plans, say these are the areas, and let them be established as land settlement areas.
Sounds extremely feasible. Mr. Hussain, your response?
So, Chairman, we have put forward a recommendation to declare 24 sites as land settlement areas, and this is currently before the LRC as well. This will give the LSA significant powers, not only to deal with the squatters who have applied in accordance with the Act, but all other occupants on these sites. Will give the LSA the power to issue leases to the other occupants, whether through the tenancy policy or whether through policies such as the government-aided self-help housing policy and the petition policy.
So let's give some hope to those persons who are affected, who are looking on now and hoping that pretty soon they will be able to have documentation in their hands with regards to the lands that they currently occupy. Do you have a timeline or time frame for when this harmonious relationship between yourselves and my friend at the Commissioner of State Lands will be effectively implemented so that recipients will start getting documentation?
Chairman, we work very closely together, the Commissioner of State Lands Office and the LSA, in constant meetings, constant collaboration. But our proposals have been sent forward, and it's before the LRC as we speak now, and we positively hoping that we will get some positive response very soon.
Excellent. Sorry.
If I may, I have observed that Mr. Hussain used the word demand, and the other party used the word requested. I think that what may bring about a speedy resolution is if there is dialogue, mutual respect, and understanding, because everybody, I think both sides want to please the citizens of the country who are in need of this. So perhaps a little tempering of the approach and a little dialogue, have little a meal together, perhaps, and it may help to resolve the issue. Yes?
Thank you very much, colleague. So the suggestion, quite frankly, is I think and it's good that you both are working together moving forward, but there's need for a button to be pressed to try to fast track, to try to pressure the LRC, which is what you're describing to me as the entity currently, that also has some staffing issues as far as I'm aware, but to push the LRC to get you your approvals and your relevant legislative changes. So I'm appealing to your good selves to engage the other parties here today, maybe over a mail, as my colleague says, to try to find the LRC who should be included in that wonderful gathering to expedite this, because they are quite, you said there are 60-something thousand squatters. I'm assuming those would have been applicants and registered squatters, or these are just squatters that you are aware of?
Chairman, there are approximately 23,000 applicants for certificates of comfort to be regularized, and then our best estimates gives us another 37,000 squatters who are on state lands scattered throughout Trinidad.
How did you determine the number of possible squatters?
Chairman, we would have done several social surveys. One of the comprehensive social surveys that we would have undertaken was in the years 2010, 2011, around that period. Then again, in 2019, 2020, we repeated the social survey where we surveyed all the known squatter sites throughout Trinidad. And based on that survey, we determined that there was approximately 60,000 squatting households in Trinidad.
I want to turn over the question. So thank you for that. I want to turn over the questioning to my colleague here, but I want to go back to the squatting issue with the squatting sites and your surveys subsequently. So I'm just putting in a notice. Colleague?
Thank you very much. So I note your priority to provide access for eligible persons to adequate, safe, and affordable housing. And however, we note as well that there are a large number of squatters and tenants who are ineligible for certificates of comforts and so on. Reading your strategic plan, it speaks to a model tenancy program. What are the objectives and how do you expect this to work?
Member, so in the year 2020, the LSA would have put forward a recommendation for the use of a tenancy policy where squatters who were not eligible in accordance with the Act, those who did not apply in accordance with the Act, you had until the 1st of January, the 27th of October 2000 to apply for regularization, and those who did not apply now have the opportunity to be regularized through the tenancy policy. The date that was approved as the eligible date would have been June 14, 2014, meant that any squatter who was occupying state land on lands that could be regularized and would meet the criteria for regularization can now apply for a tenancy policy. How this works is that the 1 to 3 year tenancy will be issued under the hands of the Commissioner of State Lands. This will be followed by a statutory lease issued by the LSA, and then ultimately a deed of lease issued by the LSA.
This program is already in train.
Yes, ma'am, but this program is in train.
And how is it working?
There has been certain deficiencies and certain things that have kept back the program. One of the things with respect to this would be the survey, the cadastral surveying, and the continued breaches by occupants of boundaries already established. The LSA has developed close to 10,000 lots over the period of time. And what you find happening on these sites is that persons continuously breach the boundaries on the sites. So when in our attempt to regularize and use the tenancy program, you find that whenever there's a breach of the boundary, you can't move forward. And this goes back to the issue that the LSA has no power to contain squatting. So squatters do as they please.
Right, and then that brings you back to the proposed legislation to give you more teeth.
Exactly.
Brings you back to the proposed legislation will give you more teeth to deal with those issues and so on. All right, so that's one concern in my mind. The other thing would be, do you see yourself ever getting to the point where you would not need a subvention from government and that you would have sufficient revenue generation to do the work that is required of you?
Remember, I can answer that question by going back to the approved pricing policy. The approved pricing policy, as approved in the year 2017, says that squatters are required to pay 25% of the open market value for the lot of land they occupy. Now, that is not in any way sufficient to meet the cost of development. So we may need a change with respect to that. And again, to effectively, for that pricing policy to effectively work, we have to be able to convince squatters that they have to pay. And one of the things is that if squatters continue to disobey the laws and continue to cross the boundaries, it is difficult to move to the next stages and get people to pay so we can get the revenue to continue the work of the LSE.
So, say education to squatters. I mean, do they understand their requirements, etc.?
Remember, we've constantly have attempted to use public education through various means to communicate with squatters and squatting settlements. Our latest attempt is the coming down by you attempt, which we coin a coming down by you, where we are going to each settlement, we're establishing community councils, going to the settlements, trying to convince persons and let them know what are the benefits of moving from just being a squatter who've applied for a certificate of comfort to obtaining a deed of lease. So that's part of the effort.
But again, you have to examine your education.
Important that you examine your education program, yeah? Because I think it's in people's interest to acquire the COCs and to get their life on a straightened platform. So, I mean, I think it's critical that education, public education, is effective. And so perhaps that's something that you can work on. I think everybody really wants to have their COCs and so on and get things straightened out, and they can move on with their living arrangements with certainty that all will be well. But so I think the public education is something that you have to really focus on. I don't know that I see in the public domain enough of that.
Okay, noted.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Chairman, I'll pose my questions to the Land Settlement Agency, but before I do so, let me take this opportunity to recognize the good work, congratulate and thank the Land Settlement Agency for the good work that they have been doing across Trinidad, especially in one of our largest squatting sites in this country, which is in the northeastern part of Trinidad. I want to thank you all for the good work that you all have been doing, improving the lives and livelihoods and those communities in the northeastern part of Trinidad and across Trinidad and Tobago. According to your submissions, the Land Settlement Agency identifies several challenges in its ability to fulfill its mandate, inclusive of the restrictive nature of the legislation. The fact that the Land Settlement Agency is not the owner of the land, sites under the jurisdiction of other state entities, land grabbing, and the inability of the individuals applying for regularization of tenure under the Act to progress beyond the certificate of comfort phase and squatting on private lands, I would like to know the following. Could you explain the process from the receipt of the certificate of comfort COC on unscheduled sites and areas, since the LSA has responsibility for designated areas and land settlement areas?
Members, so your question pertains to the applicants on unscheduled sites. So a person who applied for regularization in accordance with...
Mr. Michael.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Your question pertains to the regularization of persons on unscheduled sites. There are 251 sites. So, okay. Sorry, there are 251 sites.
The regularized microphone.
It's gone off.
Good. It's better. It's off again.
Yeah, I'm having some challenges on this.
So, member, let me go back again. Okay, so the question pertains to regularization of persons on unscheduled sites. So first, let me point out that there are 251 scheduled sites in Trinidad, and in our best estimate puts another 100 sites as unscheduled sites. Applicants on scheduled sites, based on our information, is approximately 9,000 persons. And then we have persons who have applied in accordance with the Act, but they are on scheduled sites. Those persons, once they're on state lands, can only move forward up to the state of getting a certificate of comfort. They would not be able to move further than a certificate of comfort to a statutory lease or deed of lease. In order for them to move forward, we have to get these sites now scheduled. But they are scattered. We have discovered that most of these people are scattered all over Trinidad on state lands. So that's the issue. The issue is designating new sites before we can move forward. We have put forward recommendations, which is before the LRC again, with respect to designating new sites.
Okay,
but remember, if I could add, but that's an issue that has to be looked at carefully, because what you have, what we define as a site may have 1 or 2 persons, and these persons are scattered on state lands all over Trinidad. So something for consideration, whether, how do you then define a site?
Okay, thank you. One other quick question. Based on the figures you just gave just now, you would have mentioned 9,000 applicants for scheduled sites. Could you say an average or estimated number of applicants for the unscheduled sites? Do you have that figures?
Yeah, so the estimate for unscheduled sites, I think it would be around the same number of persons on unscheduled sites. We also have applicants who applied to the LSU on private lands who we cannot treat with.
Okay, thanks. Following question, another question. How many sites listed on the schedule of the SLRT Act are situated on privately owned land?
So we have identified at least 5 sites that are private lands, and they could be more, but based on our research, we have 5 sites. There's a site in Seaview, there's a site in Madras, there's a site in Siparia, Taylor Brito, and those sites are private land sites.
Okay, thank you. My final question at this time is, I know you mentioned the coming down by you and the public edification of the squatting sites and the residents there and whatnot. Any intent to improve on what you would have done so far? Because I know we would have saw you all around. You all must have had some results of it. Any intent to improve? Because we are all aware of the conflicting information that happens within communities and the residents who are most time unaware as to the different process and how they really move from one stage to the next, the issues of encroachment and all the different violations that sometimes delay the very process that they are trying to go through. Any intent to ramp up and improve the coming down by you or any other program that you have to really educate the members of those communities?
Certainly, and through our community development unit, we are ramping up operations. We have engaged more staff in the particular unit, and both the community development unit and the tenure regularization unit. The intention is to ramp up operations, as you said, over this year and the coming years, so we can the information flow can be a little better.
Thank you very much, CEO.
Thank you very much. Member Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to commend the agency for the Auditor General's reflection that very recently you would have apparently come up to speed with some of your accounts that were due and reporting that was due. I want to step back a little bit to a thread raised by member Gopi Schoon, and that is a reference to your interface with the public at large and the role of the LSA, if any, with respect to public education? Now, you've already shared some very useful data with the committee. Your estimate of 60,000 households that are in a squatter situation, 251 scheduled and over 100 unscheduled sites. I want to start by asking you if you have a sense of the trend over the years. Is this something that is accelerating the number of squatters? Did it peak at a certain point? Just to give that sense as to where we're going, because in my view, that's always matched to an expectation of resources and how much national commitment will continue to have to go to treating this problem. So what is the trend? Is this something that is burgeoning, or did it already peak and maybe we're seeing some degree of lessening of the burden? I am interested as well as to the contribution of the migrant population to what we might classify as squatting, even though they may not be beneficiaries of some of the programming that you offer. So I would like a comment on that as well, and the contribution. And then there's a view that there's a culture of land grabbing and squatting that has arisen over the course of generations. Does the LSA have any role to play in addressing that overall culture beyond your very specific and legal mandate? Do you see any role in that regard? And I'd like some response from you on that phenomenon and the culture of land grabbing in Trinidad and Tobago. And some may see, is there a danger in whether your operations might, in some way, and your successes, be deemed to incentivize that type of culture? So sorry about the mixed questions, but I'm just trying to generate some responses from you.
Okay, Member Chairman. I'll start with the trend. Since the establishment of the LSA back in 1999, we have looked at the numbers, and on average, based on the sites that we patrol, and we don't patrol all state lands because we patrol most of our designated sites, but based on the sites we have patrolled over the years, the trend has been, on average, 400 to 500 new squatting families per year. In particular years, 2009-10, 2014-2015, we found that the number of squatters in those years would have increased. Presently, and if I go to 2020, 2021, in the years of COVID, the numbers went down because of less activity. But on average, it's about 400 to 500 new squatting families per year. The trend now, what we are seeing is that, and over the years as well, but in particular now, there's a lot of movement of new structures in our forest reserves, which is frightening. And if we look at the Valencia area, the Long Stretch Reserve, there's a lot of new squatting taking place and destruction of our pristine forests. And that is something that is troubling to all of us. In terms of the migrant population, we don't have any hard facts about the migrant population and if there's any, what attempts. But we are currently doing surveys, and that will reveal if there's any trend or any increase or migrant population squatting now. So maybe in the next couple months we'll be able to see what we've found. In terms of the culture of squatting, what we can say is that this has been something over the last 200 years. Squatting started with after the abolition of slavery, and mind you, the numbers were small. Up to 1963, based on our research, the number of recorded squatters was just over 2,000. 1998, when persons were asked to apply, 23,000, and now the figures are tending to 60,000 and increasing. People gravitate towards land and available land. because they see it as an alternative or way of getting a place to live. Whether our actions at the LSA has encouraged squatting, that's one school of thought, because as you regularize persons, people probably see the benefits of being regularized, getting a secure area, having access to that property, being able to take that property if you get and take a mortgage on it, etc. So it is one school of thought that might be encouraging others to squat as well. But the bottom line with all of this is that there is need to stop what is happening. And containment legislation is really imperative.
Here, just a follow-up, and I know it was not the full substance of the response from the chairman, the CEO, sorry, but the comment that squatting commenced after slavery, there is a view that land grabbing occurred even before slaves arrived. So just in brackets.
Remember, that might very well be so, but we don't have any evidence.
Member Thompson-Aye, your questions?
In your report, you stated that. Thank you. In your report, you stated there are currently 82 vacancies at the LSA. 193 positions on the official organizational structure was approved. They were all approved in May 2012. And since that time, you've had significant changes have been made to the organizational structure to facilitate the agency's expanded mandate, which included the creation of the Housing and Village Improvement Program, Subunit Special Projects Unit, Cultural Homestead Program, changes to structure in keeping with the procurement legislation. The optimal staffing, you say, is 250 employees. And you are currently reviewing and restructuring the organizational structure to ensure that there's an alignment with the agency's current mandate. And in your strategic plan, you identified weaknesses for the LSA. One was difficulty in attracting persons to fill technical positions. Tell me, kind sir, why are so many workers employed under temporary arrangements? Are the positions on the current organizational structure supposed to be fixed-term contract arrangements? In addition to the temporary arrangement, are the compensation packages competitive enough to attract and retain high-caliber staff? How soon will the proposed revision of the organizational structure be completed and submitted to the Ministry for action? How does the LSA plan to address employee retention? You spoke about ramping up of operations, and when you talk about that, you're talking, in fact, about increased activity, which requires expanded staff. So, how do you plan to deal with those issues?
Member, yes, the LSA has a current approved org structure of 193, and there are a number of vacant positions on that. So the initial comment is that our filling of positions is a function or based on available resources and available finances. And year to year, we would ask for additional funding to fill all the positions. And of course, if we don't get the requisite funding, we are unable to fill all the positions as we would like. Hence the reason we have engaged a number of persons on a temporary basis, and a number of persons are engaged on a project basis as well, for us to continue our mandate and our operations. And as you said and mentioned, over the years, we have expanded the operations from merely being one that is seen about squatter regularization. We are now involved in several other programs, the Housing and Village Improvement Program, the government-aided self-help housing program, provision of lots for expatriate workers, and we are now involved with the Youth Agricultural Homestead Program. So the operations has expanded, and there's need for additional staff to continue the good work of the LSA, if I may say. And what we have done is attempt to engage persons on a temporary basis until we can have the requisite funding to engage on a more permanent or contract basis. The issue of compensation, and that's very interesting, no, we are not properly compensated. And there's need for review, and we have put forward our recommendations, and the last approved salary period we had was the period 2012 to 2015. We have put forward a recommendation to our permanent secretary. That was done about 6 months ago, and we are hoping that we get some traction on that. And we're really hoping that something happens with respect to that, so we can not only attract, but we can keep employees at the LSA, because we have a constant turnover of employees as they are attracted to other organizations who might be paying better salaries. And with respect to the revision of the org structure, we have completed that exercise. It was recently approved by our board. There's a new structure of 243 positions that has been recommended. We are finalizing that for submission to our ministry. We are currently finalizing the job descriptions and the compensation packages to go with that new structure. We estimate by the end of this month that new structure will be forwarded to our ministry.
So you usually invited before budget to put forward proposals, and you have been doing so vigorously and putting in your demands, your word?
Remember, over the years, we have constantly done that.
Well, you really have to think about another strategy. You can't go on as you're going, because you really need, if you say you're ramping up, you really need the staff.
Yeah, and members, you're right. And as we expand and more, as we are mandated to do additional things, Housing and Village Improvement Program, government-aided self-help housing program, the pet return program, now the youth agricultural homestead program as part of that. We need the additional staff, and we need the packages to attract the right persons as well.
Well, you never know. It's a very important year. Who knows?
Yes.
Thank you. Before I turn over to Member John, I just want to pick up on the issue that you raised. Based on the statistics before us, the LSA is severely short-staffed based on the documentation that we have. It works out to about 45% less than you should have had. I recognize from the data that you supplied that you have made that up by short-term employment. But I was looking at the audit report, the payroll management and compliance audit report, and there's another one, the review of the recruitment and selection process at the LSA agency audit report. Both of these reports, which you would have used, which would have assessed the practices of the LSA in employing staff, and this would have been the short-term employment specifically. This is over the period. This report is dated November 2023, the audit report. And one of the major concerns I have, because you're supplementing your employment, your established employment, because you're supplementing that with short-term employment. But some of the concerns raised here are substantial. The absence of a recruitment and selection procedure manual at the HR admin unit. The HR subunit is understaffed and there are vacant positions, including 10 BOAs and the human resource analyst. Recruitment records are maintained manually instead of computerized. There's no evidence to support the shortlisting process in the recruitment files. And there's some even more severe constraints identified in this audit report. Now, this audit report is dated 2023. It identifies crises within your process for employing the very same people that you just said that you needed to put in. What has been done between then and now, because I could go through this, and like I said, there's some very, very disturbing contents here that have been highlighted by the LSA itself in its own audit report. What has been done between 2023 to current, to today, to ensure that these very serious issues that were raised with the employment practices of the LSA have been addressed so that we don't have these issues if we have an audit tomorrow?
Okay, so Chairman, we have had we have reviewed our human resource policy, and there have been significant review, and coming out of the audit reports, we have that's where the initial restructuring of the LSA it came about through that, and we have been since 2023 to now. We have been reviewing the entire organization structure in terms of what are the true requirements in terms of human resources, and in particular in the human resource department as well. So that has been happening, and hence we've come up with a new organization structure. We have done some review of the human resource policies in terms of the practices and hiring practices. So all of that has been done.
All right, because the issue is not just the number of personnel, the addition of personnel itself. It's the actual practice of the LSA that has been allowed to slide. I'll give you the example. One example I want to highlight here. Item 5 on your audit that you've supplied to us. There's no evidence that 1, background and reference checks were performed, or that 2, academic certificates and credentials were validated or verified prior to hiring personnel. The risk with that, the effect of that, is that unsuitable or unqualified persons can be hired due to checks not being performed. That's a major concern. But it's also a major requirement. It's a standard requirement that should have been, this should never appear on an audit. It is a standard requirement that you cross-check references supplied to you, cross-check qualifications, etc. But what this audit tells me is that persons whose backgrounds may or may not have been legitimate may currently have been employed or may currently be employed by the LSC. That is a very disturbing factor. Now, I am hoping that somebody would have been held accountable for these errors. What the audit says is what the problems are. It actually provides proposed solutions. It says what the problems are, what the effects are, and the proposed solutions. But somebody has to be held accountable for the serious deficiencies in the hiring practices of the LSA during this period. Now, this was for October 2021 to September 2023. It can't be that we accept the recommendations and we just wash our hands and move forward, especially when some basic hiring procedures were violated, were ignored totally. So I want to ask a straightforward question: who has been held accountable, if anybody, for these deficiencies, which would have created a problem in LSA's staffing competence?
Chairman, the deficiencies would have been as a result of the lack of staffing in the particular unit. And what we have done is to strengthen the particular unit, the human resource department, by engaging a human resource specialist now to try to make this system a lot more efficient now. So we have corrected it by doing that and bringing in adequate staffing.
When was that done?
Our human resource specialist, if I can ask, would have come on board about 2 years ago or so.
Yeah, 3 years ago.
Yeah.
3 years ago. But that just highlights my point. The audit was for the period 2021, October, to September 2023. That's 2 years ago. Right? We were in 2025. So I'm being generous with it being 2 years. So that officer would have theoretically been in place when this audit, during the period that this audit covered. And yet I'm saying, I mean, I really don't want to belabor the point. I'm trying to give you the best option to say that these items were identified and you found a credible, workable, and implemented a solution so that we don't have some of the very basic mistakes being made here. Because this is careless. Huh? This not doing background checks, that is a very sad oversight. It should have been any entity that is doing procurement of staffing, basic requirement. I'm sure that you would have engaged staff, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. Another issue that was raised, the audit team was unable to verify that all positions were advertised internally or externally, as copies of the advertisements were not recorded for the recruitment details. Candidates did not always score 50% and above. You see, things like that suggest that there's some random hiring mechanism that exists at the LSA, which is not workable, it's not feasible. And that is for short-term employment, which your oversight of the establishment for that is less. because it's outside of the establishment. So I understand that you may have an urgency, you may have a need, but even fulfilling the agency, the urgency and the need, you must abide by basic processes. Now, I was hoping that you would be able to say, yes, we have hired an individual, we have identified the weaknesses here by the audit, and a new individual has been identified that will treat with these things and proper guidelines and high-end practices and procedures and interview requirements, whatever the regulations are, that would have been put in place. I'm hoping still that you'll be able to say that now.
Yes, Chairman, and we've hired a new corporate services manager, Ms. Tracy Davidson-Celestin, who's been looking at all these processes and has been strengthening these processes.
Thank you very much. Ms. Davidson-Celestin, you have these documents as well in front of you. So you know that I'm not sure when you would have come on board, but you know that what existed is inappropriate. And it would, from my understanding, clearly affected the effectiveness of the LSA to meet its mandate. Because if you have persons who are employed to commit to do a job and they are not necessarily qualified, or we're not sure how their qualifications run, or they did not score 50% and were still hired, then that signals that we may have the wrong people in the wrong job, which will obviously impact the efficiency of the LSA, which we all don't want. We want the best for LSA. So, ma'am, I know that you have a large task on your shoulders, and I hope that I'm extremely confident that you're capable, because I know that this time, in terms of hiring a person at that level, that Mr. Nasser Hussain and his group would have made sure that they verified and so on your competence. I just put you on notice that you have big shoes to fill. Well, not big shoes to fill, but a substantial job to do to ensure that we don't have these sorts of audits being presented for an entity that has been around for so long.
If I can add,
Yes, please.
We work very closely with the internal auditor, and of course she has the responsibility to audit our mechanisms and even our rules, how we apply our rules and regulations. But let me say that with our HR policy, it states very clearly how we are to go about engaging persons to be hired in the land settlement agency. And to my mind, it is a very robust process. As a matter of fact, if you were to look at the land settlement HR policy, you would see that the recruitment pass rate must be 60% in terms of the interview scores. From what I've seen since being in the land settlement agency, we have not engaged anyone falling outside of the 60% range. Sometimes what may happen with regards to the internal audit process, at the time that the audit is taking place, the documents may not be available. And the internal auditor may be required to have discussions with the relevant persons to acquire those documents for review. We are at that point now where those items remain open on the internal audit schedule, and we intend to provide the information. But the point I am making is that we have a very robust recruitment process at the LSA. As a matter of fact, if the interview scores are not above 60%, the FHRAC, which is the Finance, Human Resource and Administration Subcommittee, plus the Land Settlement Committee, they do not confirm the engagement of those personnel. And we follow CPO rules in terms of advertisement. As a matter of fact, if you were to look at the policy as well, it spells out that all positions at the LSA must be placed in national newspaper and even on our website before those persons are engaged. So whether it be short-term positions or fixed-term positions, all of them are advertised nationally.
Thank you for that. I just want to highlight that your human resource policy was dated March 26, 2012 and amended April 2016. And the audit which found, so that this should have been the Bible, the guideline, but the audit which found the deficiencies was dated 2023.
Yes.
So that the HR policy was in existence and the deficiencies still existed. So I guess a little bit more aggressive policing of the implementation is critical. I will come back to some of these issues, but I want to turn over to Member John, who has some other questions for you
Thank you
guys.
very much, Chairman. Thank you, LSE. Mr. Hussain, you have been at the LSE for quite a while now, so you are well versed in the management of the authority. I'm noticing that you have in your org structure, you have 193 listed positions, but you have 111 filled with a vacancy of about 82. So you almost have 40+% vacancy. I mean, you can't operate like that. You're saying what is happening there, even with respect to filling these folks via contract? What is happening there?
Well, Ms. John, remember the filling of the positions, we will only be able to fill those positions if the budget allocation is adequate to do so. And that has been the deficiency over the years.
Right. So which brings me to you, well, we're talking about your budget. We're not going much into it. I haven't kind of looked at it. But I've had a note here where they had an internal audit function, and then I looked at the org structure, well, the listing, and I saw you did indeed have an internal audit. But your audits are lagging. Your external audits are lagging by over a decade. So then if you have a strategic plan that is up to 2026, 2022 to 2026, it's not an alignment, because really your strategic plan has to be in alignment with your budget every year, and then there's the accountability. So what is happening with respect to your preparation?
Members pointed out by the Auditor General's Department, we are hoping that our audits can be brought up to date, and we have submitted our financials, up to the financial year 2023, so we are hoping that this can be in alignment now.
So that's an issue for the Auditor General?
Yes.
Have you asked them to, well, I mean, you probably doesn't have the budget, but can you ask for external support? For permission to
our
hire
Act specifies that our accounts must be audited by the Auditor General.
Even if you go to the board?
Yeah, even if the Act specifies that.
All right. With respect to your arrest some squatters, something I just saw. Your curve was very linear in that regard. Okay, you had about 121 million in terms of, in 2021, the historical receivables. Who makes up those receivables?
So the receivables are largely for squatters who are expected to pay for land over a period of time. But I just want to point out that the Act says that a squatter has 30 years in which to pay, but does not specify that it has an annual amount to pay. So not before the end of the 30th year does he come into arrears as such.
So it means what is on your book is not even kind of, it's not a clear indication, it's not a true reflection, because people still get into that 30 years, is that what we're saying?
Exactly, because we would have started issuing leases from around 2014 or thereabout, and well, no, 2017, sorry, after the pricing policy was passed. So we know we're close to that 30-year period as yet.
But if you do a projection for your ministry, can you do you could do a projection for your ministry to show them that, look, if we continue on this trajectory, this is where we are going to be, and whether we can have an amendment. Because it can't be that somebody, after 30 years, then they become a debtor.
Certainly we can look at that.
The other thing I want to ask about, you said now you have about 60,000 squatters, and they are now encroaching into the forest reserve?
Well, remember, it's the encroachment in the forest reserve has started a long while now. But what you've seen, the available lands, the lands that are now available, in state lands available, are in the forest reserve. So you find a lot more persons are encroaching onto the forest reserves. What we also find is a lot more persons are now going over the 300 feet contour, which is the maximum limit that can be approved by the Town and Country Department. So if you look along the hillsides from Port of Spain, go all the way east, a lot of squatting is taking place above the 300 feet contour now.
And so what now? Whose responsibility is that? You, the police, who is it?
Well, our act is clear, and the law is clear that the responsibility, and my friend here, the Commissioner of State Lands, is at the back. The LSA doesn't have the authority to contain squatting, and that was highlighted in the 2010 Justice Gobin judgment that says the LSA, you cannot remove any squatter, and you cannot take any action because you don't have the power to do so. So that rests clearly in the hands of the Commissioner of State Lands, but as we pointed out before, there's need for adequate legislation to deal with the issue.
But you have a relationship, there's some symbiosis between you and the Commissioner of State Lands, because, I mean, when this squatting takes place, it's now your business to go and regularize them. Or that you're called upon, perhaps, to look at them and regularize them. What are your terms? What do you look at, the parameters, the variables that causes, say, I can regularize this community of squatters, or they should be regularized?
So that goes straight back to the Act, and the Act has identified 251 squatting sites. So those are the sites that we primarily look at for regularization.
So you regularize them, notwithstanding what the quality of the structure is, etc., or is it that you have certain mechanism to lean on people to say, listen, these things, whatever, maybe a structure might not be acceptable, even if people are very poor, because it brings me to another observation. You give out these checks from time to time to folks to help them to improve the the structures in the residential structures, right? When you do that, do you just give it to them with any requirement? Are there any requirements attached to those checks? When you say this is how you're supposed to build, you have some kind of draft design that you can give out to assist folks?
Okay, so let me go for the first comment or first question that you said. The regularization of any squatting site, as I said before, depends on it being in the Act, one. Two, it's not dependent on the quality of the individual structures, but dependent on the quality of the infrastructure. And regularization has two components. One is regularization of the infrastructure, improving the infrastructure in these squatting sites, and two, the tenure regularization, which is moving persons from being an applicant to a certificate of comfort to ultimately a deed of lease. So that's one aspect of the regularization. The other program which you alluded to would be the Housing and Village Improvement Program, which we are involved in, where it's a program that we are administering on behalf of the Ministry of Housing, where we are improving the quality of houses through using an approach where we do an assessment of the individual house. Of course, there are certain criteria that must be met. There's an income criteria. The household income has to be less than $7,000 per month. The house has to be considered as a dilapidated structure in need of repair or replacement with a starter house. So those are the criteria that we use.
But that's not, the starter house, do you have some kind of basic outline in terms of what is expected? What should be constructed then instead of whatever you would have met there?
Yes, certainly. We have a design that we are currently using for the starter house. It's a 24 by 20 starter house. In size, it's a brick and mortar. It's 480 square feet in total. It's a basic unit. There are no walls separating the interior except the bathroom, toilet, and bath which we put in. The client has to install the internal wall to make the division of the bedrooms.
But you insist on compliance with your designs?
Definitely. In fact, the LSA project manages every starter home. So it's not the individual who is building on their own. It's done in compliance.
So there's oversight with that, right? And do you have the quantity surveyors who go in to ensure that the money is well spent?
Definitely. We have project managers and quantity surveyors who look at this all the time.
And the last question I want to ask, in terms of the drawdown, you receive the releases from the Ministry of Housing. What are the big ticket items you receive these releases to fund?
Well, in terms of the big ticket items, if we look at the vote, if I look at last year's vote, the biggest allocation would have been under the Housing and Village Improvement Program. Next to that would have been the squatter regularization program and the Petrotrin program, the development of lots of ex-Petrotrin workers.
So did Petrotrin give you any input, any financial support with that there?
No, all of the input come directly through the public sector investment program.
So why they didn't even go on it? It was because of the land?
Well, we are providing residential lots for ex-Petrotrin workers in accordance with the approved cabinet policy.
But is that Petrotrin lands? Lands that were owned by Petrotrin?
It's all state lands.
State lands, okay. Yes, sir.
And by?
The right to housing is a human right. Granted, it is a second generation right. It's economic right. And people feel strongly about having a home. We've had a lot of illegal activity, murders and so on, fighting for housing. And you've spoken about the staff risk, security and well-being of staff. You say are placed at risk due to the high incidence of illegal activities that occur in squatter communities. I'm concerned as we are, about the measures that have been implemented to ensure staff safety when patrolling and monitoring squatter communities. What can you tell us about that?
Remember, it is indeed a concern of the LSA. Personally, it's a concern of mine about our staff. And if you look at the newspaper reports, you see several reports of illegal activity happening in squatting sites. We've seen in Windy Hill, we've seen in Racecourse, these areas, which are all squatting sites. So there might be some correlation between some illegal activity and squatting sites as well. And it is indeed a concern. And what we have done is, we constantly remind staff of the need to be as careful as possible. Unfortunately, we cannot provide security for every member of staff that is going out there, but it's a constant reminder about the need to be conscious of the environment.
Provide for every member. Do you provide security for any members of staff at all?
So in certain sites, if we're doing social service, for instance, we would provide a level of security officers to accompany the officers in certain sites, which we know might be a little higher risk than others.
Thank you.
I stepped out of the room, and I'm not sure whether anybody asked, but what measures are in place to prevent the development of squatting communities? In other words, one person goes, another person goes, but you know what will follow after. Are there measures in place to ensure the monitoring or whatever is required to prevent the development of a full community of squatters?
So remember, it's the measures in place is constant monitoring and patrolling by the LSA, and reporting the incidents of squatting to both the Commissioner of State Lands and the regional corporations. We constantly do that on a monthly basis. We do this. Again, I'll go back to we are unable to remove any new structures or remove any squatters, but we constantly report the activity.
The activity, but is there a department, and number one, that looks after the close monitoring? Do you have members on the field, etc.? Is that a particular department? Or what do you do? Do you put a sign? No squatting? What are the measures?
So remember, we do have what we call a containment department, a containment unit, which is staffed by security patrol officers who are constantly patrolling on a daily basis, going out to squatting sites, collecting that data and reporting that data back to the CEO, and then we submit that data to the Commissioner of State Lands and to the regional corporations, who we expect will be able to take some sort of action.
So you have roving members of staff, but do you have any modern technologies that you use?
Yes, and my chairman has just reminded me, and we are using GPS technology and GIS technology, where every structure that we pick up the coordinates of those structures, so we have that as well, so we can tell where that structure is. We can go back at any point in time to see the movement or change in the structure as well, so we have that information.
And you use it constantly? And
we constantly use that.
Okay, and there are no gaps in that department with regard to staffing and so on?
I can't say there are no gaps. There are gaps throughout the entire agency with respect to, I wish we could have filled all 193 positions if we had the funding to do so.
Okay. Okay, you know, when I spoke earlier, I dropped and I said I was displeased with the level of public education. I just want to ask you, apart, you've said you've spoken of a website. Are you using digital media to communicate? Are you on Facebook, TikTok, Twitter? Are you communicating through all of those digital means?
Yes, members, we have certainly been using those because that is the trend now where most people are getting their information. So we are using those social media methods.
Good. And your communications department is well staffed?
At present, the communications department has one communication officer.
Not good.
And the board has just approved that we engage a videographer as well. So we are about to engage that person.
I don't think one member, even two members will cut it for effective communication. Even though you use all of these modern effective digital tools, I think you're not going to get the desired result with a department of two to deal with this issue where hundreds of thousands of persons maybe are involved. So you really have a large audience to reach.
Yes.
And I think it's really a serious matter that you review with some level of speed your communications department to ensure that you have some effectiveness.
So remember, in the new organization structure that we have put forward, 243 positions, that has been considered, and the strengthening of that department is one of the areas.
Okay.
Member Monroe.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Question again, CEO. Given your answers to Member Gopi Schoon, I just want to find out, because I have a pretty fair or extent understanding of the squatting communities and how it happened and how rapid it could happen. I want to find out, given the fact also that we have the Commissioner of State Land with us here, and I am pretty sure that you all have been working very closely. I want to find out if you all have engaged in any recent talks to improve your strategy moving forward with dealing with the rapid, indiscriminate way of persons slashing and clearing our forest reserves and even those elevated areas. Because I understand the constraint you have at the LSA in terms of removing maybe and the support not coming forward from the corporations on that end. But I'm just asking if your entity and the Commissioner of State Land Office has engaged in any talks to come up with new strategies, debarring the facts of all the other issues that you all may face, to try and treat with those issues, because if we don't, we could just imagine what would happen to our forest reserves in the very near future.
So remember, with respect to our collaboration, there's constant collaboration with the Office of the Commissioner of State Lands, and I guess she can answer for herself with respect to her ability to deter or deal with new squatting. But we have constant collaboration. In fact, we have been communicating with many other agencies as well. We have an approvals committee that meets on a regular basis as well, where we have members coming and individuals coming from different agencies, including the AMA. Just recently, we would have reported to the AMA the intrusion into the area, the scientific reserve on the Sangre Grande stretch. So we have constant communications with these different agencies. But the issue remains our inability to remove or new structures.
Thanks, Mr. Hussain, but I would appreciate to hear the views of the Commissioner of State Land as well as that.
Member, I agree with Mr. Hussain that yes, we are in constant communication. But practically what happens, so I receive all his reports of all the new squatting structures. I myself am unable to do anything. I have no equipment, I don't have enough staff, and this has been a problem for decades. The last time any new field staff was in 2011. And I've been begging, almost all have retired. I am down to 1 or 2 per county. There's so much I can do. So I received his reports and I thank him very much, but really not able to effectively remove the structures. However, that being said, even if I'm able to remove a structure, because sometimes I make important phone calls and for emergency situations, if something has to be moved, then it has to be moved quickly. The problem is when we move the structure, we must have something to put in place there. Because if we just leave the place vacant, the squatter goes back and round in circles. So, for example, HDC had some urgent removals to make, same squatters. We put up a notice saying, by this date, anybody, and we used drone technology to fly the area, so we knew who were there at that date. And we put up signs saying, by this date, no further notice will be given. And we arranged with HDC, they provided the machinery, and we removed the structures. So it can be done, but it has to be that we have the resources to do it. And when we do it, we must be able to erect a fence or put up whatever other, the state agency that is requiring the parcel must be able to put or prevent further squatting. Otherwise, like I said, it just doesn't make sense sometimes until we know that we need this for a particular purpose.
Okay, thank you. I just want to find out, given the fact that we understand the purpose of the forest reserve and the ecosystem and whatnot, maybe LSA or maybe you, Commissioner of State Land, just for the public understanding, one who I believe would understand the importance of our forest reserve, given the common trend and the current trend of the clearing of forest reserves, and I could only assume that we would have limited forest reserve left or remain. If we don't get the cooperation of the general public to desist from the clearing of forest reserve or get a handle on this issue, given the timeline and the rate at which it's happening, how much years, days, weeks, or months you estimate that we will no longer have any forest reserve to rely on?
I've had this discussion with my colleague in my ministry, which is the Conservator of Forest. We don't have much time. I think we are out of time, as a matter of fact. And there are two reasons, mainly. Of course, yes, so it's the clearing of the forest reserves, let us say, on the lower levels. Those have practically gone, either into residential squatting or quarrying, some illegal. At least with the legal quarrying, we know that it will be rehabilitated later on. The problem with the higher elevations, yes, Mr. Hussain talked about above the 300-meter contour, especially in the northern range or the northeastern part of the country. To be honest, most of those are not state lands. Most of the northern range is private land. But in the forest reserves, some of them are not officially up to now designated as forest reserves. So I know Conservator Forest and myself have been working to de-reserve some of what has already been lost and formally reserve the forest reserves in the northern range.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Before I hand over to Member Brown, we have two questions from the ParlView from members of the viewing audience on the ParlView station. I think the Commissioner of State Lands just provided some level of response to one of these questions, but I want to raise it just for a fuller response. The question is, has a survey been done to see how much of the forest reserve that has been impacted by squatter developments? So I think the viewer wants to know if any survey has been done to determine a specific value or specific amount of the foreign reserves that have been impacted by squatter developments. That's the first question. And the second question, also from ParlView, Mr. Hussain, I guess this is for you. The LSA has reported that 60,000 persons have been squatting since 2015. The CEO has stated that there are 400 to 500 new squatters annually. Can the LSA explain how the statistics have not changed since 2015? So I will go first to the Commissioner of State Lands, to know if to answer the question also whether or not any assessment has been done to give a percentage possibility of the forest reserve that has been affected, and then come back for the numbers for Mr. Hussain.
As to the percentage of the forest reserves that have been affected, I can't give an exact figure at this point or percentage, but I will say it's about 50 to 60% of those forest reserves in the northern part of the country, north and central part of the country.
Thank you very much. That is extremely, extremely disturbing, because I live in a constituency, I run a constituency that has flooding as a major, major factor, and the deterioration of the hillsides will be an obvious factor in causing flooding. So that is a major concern. I'll hand over now to Mr. Hussain.
Chairman, if I just go back to the first question, we are currently doing a survey of the Valencia and Longstretch Forest Reserve, where we are taking drone imagery, and we have persons on the ground collecting data of what is happening on the ground. So that is currently happening, so we'll be able to furnish the committee with information with respect to what is happening with respect to the forest reserve. So far, we have surveyed approximately 4,000 acres in the particular area, Valencia Forest Reserve, and we have discovered over 5,000 structures. That's 1/3 of that of the forest reserve in that area, the Valencia and Longstretch. Our intention is to complete the survey of the other 8,000 acres in a short duration, and we'll be able to finish the figures that we discover.
So before you go back to the next answer then, you have two ministries present here. Your two ministries are present here. You respond both to the Ministry of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries and to the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development. So these questions are to both of them. Given the frightening statistics that we just got about the level of foreign reserves that have been impacted by squatter development, has the ministries taken any concrete steps to treat with either by legislation or by I'm not too sure. I'm going to depend on you. Have you all taken any action to treat with that? Either you tell me how. Have any action been taken to address the crises of some substantial amount of our foreign reserves having been lost by squatting?
The ministry, the ministry has been having discussion together with LSA and Commission of State Lands and I think recently Ministry of Energy on the particular issue, but it remains in discussion stage.
Ministry of Agriculture.
So, like the acting deputy PS said, there are discussions that are ongoing. Now, on a monthly basis, the Mineral Advisory Committee meets. But yes, there we have the Forestry Division as well, because I know we are talking about residential squatting, but what is attracting the residential squatting in the Forest Reserve? It's the quarries.
Of course.
Yeah, so the quarry, we can't leave them out. So the Ministry of Energy, the LSA, and ourselves, we're in constant discussion. But that is the main attraction for people to go into the Forest Reserve at this point.
And is there, you mentioned that you meet regularly in a committee. Does that committee include members of the TTPS or other agencies that may be involved in enforcing legislation to prevent denuding of the forests, etc.?
That's a twofold answer. Yes, that committee, there's a task force that's associated with it, so that interventions are made, patrols are made, but there's also another task force that within the TTPS, and they would liaise with me from time to time when they need to go and make observations or interventions.
Thank you. Back to Mr. Hussain with regards to the question raised with regards to the numbers. Yep.
So our data that we reveal would have been based on the social survey exercise that was conducted in the years 2019, 2020, and our best estimate had put it at 60,000 squatting families. Since then, the years 2020, 21, we saw the lowest numbers, and those were the COVID years. And then on average, we have about 32, we've picked up about 32 structures per month, the years 23, 24. So the numbers, of course, will be more than the 60,000 that we reported back for the social survey in 2020.
Thank you. I hope that answers the questions to members of the public. Member Brown, I'm sure you have some more questions.
Thank you, Chairman. So clearly, LSA is engaged in a challenging battle. There's another battle on this planet, which is the Russia-Ukraine war, and we'd all have seen the increasing use of drones in that scenario. With reference to drones, are you currently using drone technology? To what extent? And what, in your opinion, is the extent of the requirement for deployment of drone technology at this time? Is this something that you deem very useful, and have you been gaining value if you've been using it thus far? So I have 3 questions. That's number 1 with respect to drones. Number 2, and I cast no aspersions on the staff of the LSA, which clearly have been doing excellent work. But in your line of service, there's always a risk of breaches of integrity. And that interface, especially with the community and people who might be highly motivated to get certain outcomes, maybe outcomes faster than others, etc. There's always that risk. I have noted you have a whistleblower policy and possibly other mechanisms, but that's where my inquiry is. How else is integrity enforced within the LSA and monitored? How else are you able to monitor for breaches? So that's question number 2. And my final question starts with an observation. A lot of the concerns generated thus far have revolved around, some of them have revolved around the encroachment into forests. And maybe it would have been ideal if the conservator of forests was invited, but my understanding is there was nothing in the report that would have specifically triggered that, so maybe for future reference. So the commissioner is here, though, is Commissioner of State Lands, and I think we've made a little progress in understanding the challenge faced by the commissioner. But my question, and maybe for the public as well, is, as the law currently stands, what are the penalties associated with the breaches, such as someone proceeding to squat irregularly, whether or not it is enforced, the breach of that 300-foot limit up into the forest, just for public edification? What are the current penalties, and is that something that you have recommended to be adjusted? And again, I have already noted the challenges with enforcement, etc. And then on that same issue of the forest and what is happening to our forest reserve, I just want to share a view that it comes back to public education as well, because we seem to rely always on some state entity or uniformed persons, but in other parts of the world, the villages themselves and communities themselves see a role in preserving the forest above them or looming over them, or that they rely on to hunt and for eco-tourism and other things. So it's just, again, to refer back to that role, which isn't exclusive to LSA, but in treating with this entire culture, the role of really empowering our citizens on the value of the forest reserve, the fact that there's a reason for a forest reserve in the first place. Some people may see it as just a nuisance or a resource to be exploited completely. So I don't want to go on too long on the theme, but I think arising out of our deliberations and your responses, there is room for real work there. And therefore, if I'm living on the verge of a forest reserve, not squatting, but I own a property there, I have a role in monitoring what's happening, helping with the reporting, the feedback. They've come back now, and just to empower the village councils and our communities that they have a critical role in this, and not just to rely on agencies of the state exclusively. That partnership. So that's number 3. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Member Brown. Just a couple more questions I have. Yes, sorry.
Okay, so let me start with the use of drone technology and GIS technology. In fact, the LSA recognized the importance of GIS technology since the startup of operations back in 1999. So we have been using GIS technology and drone technology. We have acquired 2 drones over the years. Presently, with the present exercise that we are doing in the Valencia and Long Stretch Forest Reserve, we have been collaborating with the Service Division, where they are using their drone to help us to pick up the data. And that data is being every structure, as we said before, the points are we're collecting that information and tied back to the data that we're collecting. So we have been using drone. We recognize the importance of that. With respect to the whistleblowing policy, we've had a whistleblowing policy since 2018 introduced, and we're currently revising that policy in line with the new legislation. So we've had that, and maybe Ms. Davison could tell us a little more about some of the other HR things that we've been doing to strengthen that area of our operations.
Thank you, CEO. And as you said, apart from the respective policies or whistleblowing policy or ethics policy, the risk management policy, we also have internal controls. And then there, of course, is segregation of duties. So that helps us. And then we create an environment, an open door environment where persons can feel free to come in to engage, whether it be the managers and other supervisors within the organization.
And the last question dealt with, if I recall, would be the collaboration with village councils, etc.
And the penalties.
Okay, so maybe Commissioner can deal with some of the penalties. In terms of the penalties, as we know exists right now, it's really squatting is a criminal offense, and it's a period that if you're charged, you can be imprisoned. In terms of the new penalties that we have suggested new penalties in terms of for the first offense of squatting, then they're for repeat offenders, for inciting other persons to squat. So those are the new things that we have suggested for the new legislation. In terms of the use of village councils, we have been collaborating with the village councils, and in fact the LSA is mandated to form community councils in each one of the squatting sites, and we have been aggressively doing that over the last few years. As we strengthen our community development unit, we have been having more of these councils formed, and over the next few years the intention is to get to more and more of these communities so we can share information, and they can help us as well to share information with the residents in the areas.
Thank you, but some of it was a little general. At least I would ask for that 300-foot limit, if we can indicate what is the current penalty or criminal penalty and what may have been recommended for amendment or by way of amendment.
300-foot limit, contour limit, is really monitored by Town and Country Planning Division, because you will appreciate that not everybody above 300 is on state land. So it really is, I'm not so sure what the penalty, but I know they can remove the structure, but that is more the domain of the Town and Country Planning Division, and I suppose somewhere in their legislation, or they may ask for the assistance of the corporation, the regional corporation, to assist in removal. I'm not so sure if there's a fine.
Thank you very much. Just a couple of quick questions. I know you were speaking just now about a lot of the use of the IT systems, etc., drones, etc. But I noted in the strat plan for the LSA, one of the weaknesses that was identified is that some aspects of the IT database storage remain dependent on the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development. And there's a related issue raised by the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries in their submission, which basically says that, not basically, but what says, at present, the Ministry of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries does not have any IT initiatives to facilitate the collaboration between the Land Management Division and other relevant agencies to properly manage state lands. So on the one hand, we're using a lot of technology, but on the other hand, we have the SWOT analysis from the LSA specifying that they do not believe that there's a sufficient correlation in terms of sharing IT information between Ministry of Housing and Development. And similarly for the same circumstance with regards to the Ministry of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries. So there seems to be a bit of a disconnect. I don't know if the Deputy Permanent Secretary wants to weigh in on that.
At the ministry, we have a database, what we call the HAFS database, Housing Application Fulfillment System, where we collect information on applications under the various programs of the ministry, like housing applications, and we would collect information on the cash program and the housing village information improvement. Right, so it's mainly a database where we have applicants' information, not information particular to land.
I think the concern that was raised by LSA is that they don't seem to, well, specifically as is listed here on page 3 of, and page 24, 25 of their submission to us as the business plan, the strat plan, sorry, that some aspects of the IT database storage remain dependent. So that is the IT database of the LSA remains dependent on ministry. Is it that the LSA does not have its own facilities for storage of data?
And we do have our own facilities, and in fact, we are strengthening that right now. We are in the procurement process for acquiring two new servers as well. But the programs such as the government-aided self-help housing program and housing village improvement program, we are dependent on the ministry because these programs are the ministry's program, and we are project managing on behalf of the ministry, hence the reason for sharing the databases.
I understand that. Ministry of Agriculture, at present the MLF does not have any IT initiatives to facilitate. What you're basically saying is that there's no arrangements between yourselves and other agencies to share land information, state land information. That was what SWOT advised and what you advised as well. You want to comment on that? Has that improved? Has that changed? And what the effect of that absence of collaboration, what effect that has had on your ability to fulfill your mandate?
Chair, currently we are in the process of upgrading some of our information systems. At the Surveys and Mapping Division, we are hoping soon to start the implementation of a cadastral management information system. And that system, of course, would be compatible and it has an interface with the Land Registry and the Registrar General's Department. In addition, we are also seeking to upgrade the Transaction Studio and the Land Management Division. Currently, that should be done in this fiscal.
Thank you very much. I just have 2 more questions. I know we have kept you all here for quite a bit. Just 2 more questions. This is with specific regards to the PSIP for 2025. Appendix 16 of the documents you would have submitted to us, which is captioned Progress Report Metrics of Surveys, specifies that 23 projects were awaiting procurement retendering after there was a termination of the tender evaluation on June 14th, 2024. So 7 odd months ago, 23 projects had to be retendered. My question to you, sir, is what were those projects? My questions to you, what were those projects? How urgent were they? What was the effect on the organization of the retendering? What was the effect? Why did that happen? Why was the retendering required? And whether now having to push back, so that comes back to the urgency. Having now had to retender, what was the effect in terms of pushing back? How far back these projects would have been pushed back? given the urgencies, and what effect that would have had on your ability to fulfill, again, your mandate.
Okay, Chairman, these 23 projects would have been 23 surveying projects for cadastral surveying for former sites that was administered by the former project execution unit of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development. They were scoped and put out for tender, and because of the limited responses or no responses to the invitation, we've had to re-tender these sites. The process is almost complete, and we are about to go back out again for the tender of the 23 sites, and we're hoping that we can get some positive responses. Some of the areas identified for the survey, and maybe that's why we got limited responses, would have been in the Malik area, Shan Street area, and along some areas along the east-west corridor for surveying, for cadastral surveying.
Basically, that means that you would not be able to treat with squatter regularization or squatter attention in those communities that were not able to be surveyed, correct?
Right. So, Chairman, these sites, as I said before, a project execution unit site, came out of that particular program, and we are doing these surveys on behalf of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development. And you're right, we would not have been able to progress the sites further than what they are at this point in time. So the surveys will determine the extent of the boundaries for each lot in these sites, and then we'll be able to move to the tenure part of the process.
Excellent segue into the next question. Squatter site surveys for financial years 2013 to 2023. So that's a 10-year program. Based on the documentation supplied to us in numerous cases with regards to these squatter sites, under project status, the details includes project commenced but no evidence of its completion, letter of award but no evidence of project commencement. So that it's occurred on a multiplicity of occasions over the last 10 years. My question is, who is accountable? Who's responsible for monitoring these projects? What's the recording? What kind of recording takes place? Who is going to be held accountable for the fact that, the fact that we have letters of awards but no evidence of project commencements, project commenced but no evidence of completion, that's a monitoring function that seems to be totally missing, at least, and this has been highlighted now for 10 years.
Okay. Chairman, the issue with the surveying has been one that's related to containment legislation. That these surveys are started, they commence, they reach a certain point, and then you have constant intrusion or constant changes in the boundaries while the surveys are being done within the sites. And there's constant stop and start. We then have to, the surveyors will approach the director of surveys for approvals, but because of the changes that is constantly taking place on the sites, we have had many starts and stop and resurveying taking place. So it's really a function of that.
Okay, so but I want to just try to one issue where we had projects for which no status could be in. So projects was started, but there's no evidence of when projects would have been completed. Could you be able, are you in a position to tell the committee whether or not any sums have been paid, and on what basis such sums would have been paid in circumstances like that, where projects would have been started, but there's no evidence of whether completion has taken place or not taken place?
We would have paid the initial payments on those, the mobilization payments on those, and the projects would have either halted or been slowed down over the years as we speak. In terms of completion, I don't have the specifics here for each one here now, but we can certainly provide that.
Thank you. I have one final issue. I don't know if we have anything else from members of the public, but one final issue. Just to wrap it up. Mr. Hussain, to you and to the LSA itself, you have identified two issues during the conversations that we've had here, two major issues. One has been low staff, inadequate staff, and the other has been inadequate funding. And you had indicated that they related it because you could not hire staff if you have insufficient funding. Low staff, inadequate funding. How has this affected? What has been the effect of these two factors on the efficiency of the LSA?
The two are related. In terms of the efficiency, the agency itself has, in our opinion, from all reviews, has performed very well. In the absence of adequate staffing. What we have done is to engage persons on a temporary basis to try to supplement the lack of staffing on a contract for contract officers. Of course, if we had a full staffing of 193 persons as approved in the organizational structure, I think we could do a lot better. So that would be my response to that.
So I'm assuming that you have an excellent relationship with the various ministries that you engage with, especially your line ministry.
We do.
So I'm hoping that your line ministry, well, in fact, let me ask the line ministry, given the concerns that I have just raised, that Mr. Nasser is too polite to raise himself, has the ministry given any consideration to increasing the allocations to the LSA to allow it to do an even better job than it's been doing?
The ministry in itself is constrained in terms of what we can allocate. We are dependent on the Ministry of Finance and budgetary allocations in keeping with what LSA submits in their draft estimates. So we are, as a ministry, are also dependent on the Ministry of Finance.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, are there any other questions? All right, then it falls upon me to thank all members of the various entities that are here today. Thank you very much to the representatives of the LSA, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, the Ministry of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries, and the Auditor General's Department for your participation, your frank engagement today. It was very much appreciated. I'm sure that members of the viewing and listening audience has learned a lot more about the operations of the LSA and the various entities. And I also want to use the opportunity to thank the members of the viewing and listening audience for tuning in. I thank you all very much. You are hereby excused, but I thank you very much for your engagement and your willingness to provide answers to the questions and queries that we have raised. Thank you again.